Hello, good morning. I am a queer Jamfi, founder of the British Blacklist, and welcome to Soulfest discussion about gaming. So I'm here with some inspirational legends in the game, and we're going to break it all down about what it's like being a part of the gaming industry. So I'm going to chat to them for a bit, and then you guys can ask questions a bit later. A little bit of housekeeping, please stay on mute with your cameras off unless you are asking a question, as we will be recording this event. So guys, please, could you introduce yourselves? I'll start with Danny.
Hello, so my name is Danny Murdock. I am a senior animator in the games industry. I've been working in games for 20 years.
Amazing. And Corey, please introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. So obviously my name's Corey. I am a lead narrative designer at Silver Rain Games, also work independently as well on another game called Windrush Tales. Similar to Danny, actually, I've been working in the industry for coming up to 20 years this October now. So I've been bouncing around different industries, well, different parts of the industry over those 20 years. But yeah, it's been a heck of a stint, I think.
A heck of a stint. I'm sure it's been more than that, because I can imagine it's not been easy, or maybe it has. So look, first of all, because I am like, no, I'm not a gamer. I was really gonna lie and say I'm a gamer. I'm not. When I was younger, we used to play Sonic, obviously, because I'm very, very old, and Crash Bandicoot and Pandemonium. It was really good. So this is my generation of stuff, and obviously gaming has come such a long way. Well, I literally don't know what it is really, but actually we call it gaming. But what is it? What exactly is gaming, and how far-reaching does the gaming title cover the work that you guys do? Corey, and then I'll come to you afterwards, Danny.
Yeah, so I mean, the industry's been around for God, I think it must be over 50 years now or so. And for me, gaming is kind of like, it's one of those strange industries which has been around for usually a lot longer than people realize, because it's kind of like it even started off from, we go from back beyond things like Pong, which I think everybody knows of, if not necessarily have played. But it's one of those weird industries which has evolved along with the technological advances of just the general world anyway. So every time you get this leap in tech, you get this leap in kind of like gaming possibilities and everything that comes from that. And as a result, what we've seen is this kind of crazy exponential growth of like coming from people coding in their bedrooms, which has kind of come back again like over the last kind of 20 years or so, and people kind of like only being able to get availability on games from like cassette tapes or little discs or what have you, or tiny little cartridges. And the industry being kind of like, maybe a few thousand, kind of few 100,000 to something which is now globally appreciated. It's there in the sense of like being able to reach literally millions of people, millions of dollars being invested in it every single year. And it's just massive now. It's become, things like GTA, Sonic, like you mentioned, Crash Bandicoot, all household names. And these are all things that have become almost ubiquitous with the industry itself, which is crazy to think, because like Danny and myself have been in the industry for 20 years, and we've naturally been probably playing games for a lot longer than that as well. To see it grow from this little kind of like cottage industry almost to this kind of global phenomenon, it's just mad. And to be part of that as well as like, from me being a gamer to being a games journalist to being a kind of marketing copywriter to being a games writer now and narrative designer, that has kind of blown my mind to a certain degree as well. It's kind of like it's been watching the games industry grow while I've been kind of like increasing my tendrils into the different avenues of games industry at the same time. So yeah, it's kind of wild just to watch that kind of the whole medium just kind of overlap and expand in that way.
Yeah, I can imagine it's mind-blowing, because it's seeing some of the games that are available now. It's like, what the hell is this? It's like literally akin to TV, but on film. Danny, what are your thoughts on the title gaming? Does it fit? Does it need to evolve? The title needs to change?
No, I don't think so. I mean, to reiterate a point that Corey made, just to see the growth of the industry, like from when I started playing games back in the days of the ZX Spectrum. I'm showing my age there.
What? I beg you, the what?
The ZX Spectrum with the rubber keys. Yeah, I'm showing my age. I wear that with pride. Yeah, to see the growth there, and like at the start of the industry, there was a lot of stereotypes of like the type of people who worked in the industry, and now to see that it's grown to be such a massive massive industry that's worth more than the film industry. I've heard the cultural impact that so many games have. The fact that like mobile gaming in recent years has taken off, the fact that people can just sit on a phone and like kind of play a game, the level of detail and fidelity of games on phones, which is something that was unheard of like 10 years ago. It's massive, and to be a part of that for as long as I have been and for as long as I continue to be is huge. It's good to see games kind of getting the respect that it deserves as a medium, because like I said at the start of like my time in the industry, there was a certain stereotype which is attached to games and people who work in games and people who play games. But to see now that it's grown to the level it has, it's nice. It's good to be a part of.
I can imagine. And so again, for us who don't know a damn thing really, can you explain the very many different areas and categories of gaming there are in the industry? And I don't, okay, maybe not every single intricate ones, I know there's, but some of the, I think there's an assumption that a game is made and that's it. And the fact that, you know, you guys are the designers, there's animation, there's narrative, there's all those type of, so they're kind of like some like main categories within the industry that people fall into, or from a work perspective.
So there's like the development side, which is what I do, and Corey currently does now. Like me as an animator, Corey is like a narrative designer. So that involves, for me, animation, programming, character art, level art, QA testing. Then you've got like say the publishing side, which is marketing, development. Then you've got other sides like podcasters, content creators, streamers. There's different streams of the industry that there's now different avenues for people to kind of get into. Like when I started, it was just like, right, well, you can just make games. But now that it's spread out, so people who enjoy games but maybe can't get into development side can still contribute to the industry in another way.
And Corey, one thing you don't think about is that a thing on screen that's doing fighting. That's my impression of Chong-Li. I don't even know why. That they need a whole character arc and a journey and a story, but it makes sense because they've got to get from beginning to end and win the game. So, could you explain your role, what you do? Explain it, and then I'll come back to you, Danny.
Yeah, it's it varies wildly. So for example, like when you talk about beat 'em up characters, there is the intricacy sometimes of like you create this kind of background and where they're from and what their motivations are. There's a lot of work. I think probably more than a lot of people realize a lot of time when it comes to the amount of additional lore that goes into the creation of characters, even for something as relatively kind of like beat 'em up photos like a fighting game. But for something like me, like, I mean, I can't talk about the game I'm working on at Silver Rain. It's still very hush hush at this moment in time, but I can talk on a broader spectrum, and also like in terms of what I do for Windrush Tales, which is basically it's very similar to TV and very similar to movies, where you kind of like you try to create a Bible, which kind of captures the storyline, the plot, the characters, the character arcs, and all of those different elements that go into creating the narrative of the game itself. But where games tends to differentiate from TV and movies is that you're always keeping the player's experience and the player's journey in mind. So when you're thinking about things like character arcs, you're thinking about how that integrates with the gameplay itself. And that's what makes the difference between, say, a narrative designer and a writer. Usually there's a difference in terms of having to think of how it integrates with the design of the game. So you're thinking about like, how does the player's experience kind of match the goals and the motivations of the character that they're playing on the screen? How does that make sure that their journey feels satisfying? How does it make it feel coherent? How does it kind of like allow you to feel like you're on an incredible journey within this kind of massive digital domain that's been put out in front of them? So you are creating things like character sheets, you are creating things like location sheets, you're putting together all the different intricacies of the environment and the world that's being created there. And like Danny says, it's kind of like it becomes a very collaborative effort, because everybody in the studio needs to be a storyteller of some way, and everyone's got their own, I guess, perspective of what they feel is being put out there. So, you know, you may have like a general overview of what the game is about and what the characters are doing and everything like that, but everyone's got to have their own like personal slant on that. So, you know, you're passing a character sheet over to a artist and an animator, and they may put it in a way which is slightly different from what you may have in mind. Usually it's better from what you had in mind, because that's the nature of the collaboration. But everyone's bringing their own kind of like tools and their own kind of like experiences and elements to that level of storytelling. So it becomes this really kind of massive collaborative effort where the narrative itself, yes, may sit at the, a part of the kind of foundation of the story itself, but everybody is contributing to making sure that they're telling part of that story through their own discipline and through their own kind of talents themselves too.
It sounds like it's a real team effort, and every chink in the link in the chain has to kind of connect, or someone can't make a mistake along the way because it just sets dominoes falling, I'm assuming. Danny, tell us a bit about what you do. And Corey mentioned, I made a note, you said fighter characters. So I now know that there's different categories of characters and types of games. So I also want you to tell me what they are and where you predominantly work.
Okay, so fighting games or beat 'em ups essentially is like a one-on-one game, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, that kind of stuff. I have typically worked on single-player action adventure games, thankfully, which involve a lot of combat. Now, for an animator, that stuff is so much fun to work on. Like, you can just let your imagination kind of run wild. But to kind of reiterate the point that Corey made, to circle back to the point we were making earlier in terms of like a misunderstanding about games. A lot of people think that games are simple, so you don't need to worry about things like stories and character arcs. But essentially, especially like with a narrative game, in some ways it's even more important because you're taking the player on a journey, but you've got to want them to continue playing that game. So at each stage, they've got to be like, right, I want to continue like following this character's journey, that I want to see what happens to them next. So you've got to make sure that's engaging in all aspects. And then because of that, yeah, everybody needs to know their role within that. So myself as an animator, if I'm animating a character, I need to know their kind of motivations or their backstory or why they might move in a certain way. So it all has to come together into like one cohesive unit. Otherwise, people kind of playing it be like, yeah, this doesn't really fit. I'll put it down and go and play something else. I'll watch something.
And so where are you guys in the food chain of creating a game, Corey? At what stage are you involved, and who's before you and who's after you?
It's quite an intricate answer, to be honest. It's so basically, without trying to minimize writers on a whole across every single medium in every single industry, with games back in the day, it was quite often you would have writers come in at the very last minute. So writing would be minimized to a point where it's like, oh, okay, we've got a general idea, we can kind of put stuff together, and then we'll put in like dialogue and like the narrative direction of the game at the last minute. So we hire some writers there, or alternatively other members of staff, whether they're programmers, designers, what have you, will do the writing themselves. And over a period of time, the role of writer or narrative designer kind of started to grow and become a bit more important. And so like where I'm working right now, the way that I work is that I've been brought in for both of my projects at quite a really, really early stage. It's like some of the story may have been created beforehand, or the concept of the game itself may be put down. And usually it's my job to kind of sit down and then kind of go, okay, so we can have the characters go in this direction, or we can have like the game work with the characters to a certain way, or bring in some additional kind of like a supporting cast to accentuate the character arc of the main player character, and start kind of putting together like dialogue snippets and working out what the environment is and how that ties into the themes of the game and stuff, other stuff which kind of helps enrich the entire narrative. So you tend to find like Danny was saying, with like narrative driven games, that like adventure games and action adventure games and role-playing games and stuff like that, where the narrative is really important to the entire journey of the player. Writers and narrative designers tend to be brought in at really, really early stage, and at that point you start kind of working with like the creative director or the lead designer, or like other leads within the company as well, to start kind of chipping in and start formulating the tentpole of essentially what this game is going to kind of be about, what it's going to look like, the general character of it, the general theme and the tones, all those sort of things that are really integral to coming across as to what the game is going to be about. Like Danny mentioned, actually, it's like the thing with games is that every detail that you come across in games has likely been play tested, designed, and kind of worked on for weeks, months, years on end to make sure it gets right. Because if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't read right, if it doesn't play right, you immediately know. The player just knows off the bat straight. So to get that one little thing that most players probably don't even notice, because if it's working, then you don't tend to notice it. It's just smooth. It just all works. But as developers, we're constantly just like working all the time just to get it just right. And as a narrative designer, one of the things that's really important is to make sure that it feels like the characters are working in a naturalistic way. It feels like they're going like on a journey themselves that feels earned, that feels consequential, that feels like it's actually having an effect on what the player's actually doing in the game itself. So if the game is narrative driven, then it's always important to have the narrative designers, the writers come in at a really early stage. Not all game and genres need that, but some of them that is like integral to the game, they're absolutely essential. Otherwise, you get a very disjointed type of game and type of experience, which can show very quickly when the player starts picking things up and start playing.
I just want to quickly come back to you and say, so what do you need to make your job easier? Do you need to see, what do you need to know to make your job smooth?
It's usually it's a good idea to have like a spine of where things are going. Like in TV and movies, like especially TV, you tend to have showrunners that will kind of sit down and say, okay, so this is the overall vision of the game itself. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to achieve and what we want the player to feel. Those elements can be basic or they can be a little bit expansive, but either way, those can be the things that help me as a narrative designer to go, okay, so if we want the player to feel like, for example, fear, if it's, we have a genre called survival horror, which is kind of like you drop the player, you make them underpowered compared to everything else around you. And then you have a horror environment where everything is basically out to get them, can kill them, stalk them, typical kind of like horror sort of thing, but it's ramped up because you're the person that's experiencing the horror. So something like that, you know, the creative design, kind of director may go, okay, we want the player to feel fear in these environments and what they do. So you go, okay, so what makes the player feel fear? What will make them feel scared? What are the elements that makes them kind of really feel the tension and the conflict of the game? And that's when you start pulling from other kind of sources of other materials in your imagination and everything. So what helps us from that perspective is just having a really, really strong and firm direction and idea of what you want from that. And that can be enough just really to allow yourself to go wild with your imagination and start kind of like sourcing it all together.
Danny, where do you fit in the chain? And yeah, also, what do you need to make your life easier being an animator?
So animation comes in quite early during the process, because when you're like starting out a game, you can essentially have a character which is like a block or a ball, depending on what you need to do to represent that on-screen avatar. But the animation is what kind of gives it that life. So you want to be like, okay, you want the character to start walking, so then I will need to provide a walk cycle, and they need to jump, I need to provide that jump. So then I start fleshing out the character's movement set. So we can just start off with something basic, and then over time just make that more detailed as the game evolves. Now, just jumping back on Corey's point there about kind of a survival horror game, how that might work. So it might start off with like, you might have a character moving around, which would be a block. Then it's be like, okay, right, you have them walking around. Now, to show fear, I would then maybe animate them in a kind of scared state. And then we might want to have to ramp them up into kind of a next level. So it's almost like the animation is a representation of the character's current emotional or physical state. In terms of what makes my life easier, just as much clear direction as possible. Like in that instance, it would be like the character needs to look scared. I mean, okay, right. How fast are they moving? Are they walking with a limp? Have they been injured? Or say if I'm animating a combat move, it's like, okay, right. Is this a fast attack? Is it a quick attack? Do they need to finish in a certain position? As much detail as possible, so I can get it into the game as quickly as possible, and most importantly, make it feel right. Because a lot of animators, it's like, I'll go and animate something, and then they can go to town and make it all flamboyant and stuff. But it'd be like, right, well, that doesn't fit the game. We might need something to be quick, so it needs to fit within a certain period of time, and a strike needs to happen on this particular frame. So as much detail and context as possible for me.
And I get what's your, I guess, your favorite area? I'm going to say genre. Is that right?
Yeah.
I feel so discombobulated. What's your favorite area to animate in? or style? I don't even know. Because yes, that's another question, but go on.
Okay. I love animated combat moves. I love it. It's just, especially stuff which is something which a human being typically couldn't do. You can just have so much fun with it, going away, like doing some research. I say reference, I can't fight, but like looking up videos of people doing stuff and that, maybe combining stuff. Oh, I like this bit, I like that bit, putting that stuff together. That for an animator, that's so much fun. Or doing like crazy agility stuff, like backflips and stuff like that. That's just anything which is challenging, but also which is like cool to see and do in a game. I love doing that stuff.
Okay, great. Corey, so for both of you, but I'm going to Corey first. Was gaming a straightforward plan? Were you like, I'm going to get work from the age of 5? You're like, I'm definitely going to be a gamer. No, you're not a gamer. You're a games developer, work in the gaming industry. I'm trying to get my terminology correct. So was it a straightforward plan ever since you were a little boy, or is it something that you stumbled into and kind of like, oh wow, okay, my skills can transfer into this, and this is where I'm at now?
Yeah, I was generally seen as like the crazy kid of my school friends. So like when I was about 11 years old, I read a lot, I played a lot of games. I've been playing games since I was about 4 years old at that point, and I wanted to basically merge the disciplines of writing and video game industry. So when I was 11 years old, I realized that I had like a ton of, like literally hundreds of video game magazines, and I thought, hey, people are getting paid to write about games, so that sounds like a good job. That sounds like a cool job. So it's like, it's the best things I like. I like playing games. I love writing. These are the big things that match together. So I focused on that since 11 years old. And as a result, what I ended up doing was I ended up pushing on all the subjects which allowed me to expand my writing style and my writing discipline. So I studied English, I studied history, did my A levels in the same subjects, then went on top of that to I went and did a BA in English language and literature. And then at that point, I made the realization that, okay, I love writing. I don't know how to get into fiction. I don't know how to write games, but I still want to be a video games journalist. How do you be a video games journalist? And I was like, okay, just be a journalist, right? So I thought, rather than stay at my BA level and just kind of focus on other stuff from that point onwards and just try and get a job, I thought I'll try to just get qualified as a journalist. So I went and did an MA in multimedia journalism, which basically set me up because it was a course which had only been running for 2 years because the internet was like super young at that point. This is like 2000, basically 2001. And if I had my MA from this, it basically would have meant that I was like one in maybe 30 people in the entire country that had a MA in multimedia journalism, specifically to help me with internet writing. So I did that and then fell straight into video games journalism because I did like a kind of like a placement while I was doing my master's. And that kind of just spiraled basically because I carried on. I kind of fulfilled my dream as a video game journalist and thought, I really like this. I love this. And eventually kind of like made my way into PlayStation. And I was there for about 11 years as a content producer, which is basically kind of a little bit like journalism, but more marketing slanted. So I did that for a while. It allowed me to kind of expand my skill set and kind of increase my writing styles. But I was also still had one eye on becoming a video games writer, which I was kind of learning a little bit on the way because I already knew how to write fiction. I was writing comic books for like 10 years at that point in my life. And did a bit of prose as well. So it was always about kind of really allowing myself to have as many tools in my belt as possible. So when I started kind of applying for video game writing jobs and narrative designer jobs, I didn't have experience as a video game writer, but I had experience as a fiction writer. And I had experience through working in the games industry for over a decade at that point. And those allowed me to kind of like get back into the mode of thinking, okay, I can be a video game writer, I can be a narrative designer. So when I became a narrative designer and a video game writer, like the fundamentals were already there from the journalism, from the marketing, from everything else that came from that point. So yeah, it was a long plan, basically, a long intricate plan to get me to that point, but it was a very enjoyable one at the same time.
But I mean, it's testament to you leaning into what you're good at. I think that's something I've kind of lived by, that lean into what you're good at, because that slightly makes the path and the career a bit easier. And Danny, same to you. Were you a little boy drawing stick men and women doing combat moves, thinking I am going to do something with this?
No. No, like I always used to love obviously playing games. I read comic books and stuff. I never thought about games as a career. When I was in school, I wanted to be an architect. I remember we had an architect coming to school to talk to us. I was like, oh, that sounded like something that's interesting. So throughout secondary school, I always liked art and English, but I was like, I don't see how I could get into games. Like as much as I love playing games and like Corey, I had like hundreds of like games magazines, but I'm like, I don't see kind of a pathway to this. But you know, I'm sure I'll kind of figure out a career. So when it got to do my A levels, I remember I didn't do computer science. I did business studies because somebody said, "Oh yeah, computer science you're not going to learn much. Business studies is better for computing." I was like, "Okay." So I did English, art, and business studies. And then when it came to picking university, I was like, "Right, I'm not sure what I want to do." And then I saw an animation course at Bournemouth University, and I'm like, "Oh, sounds interesting." And I remember at the time, my head of six, she didn't want me to go there. She said, "Oh, that." I should maybe go for a more traditional uni because I did quite well at GCSE. So I was predicted to do well at A levels. So I think she wanted me to go down a traditional route. But I was like, well, I'm not really interested in anything like that. Like I had an English teacher who said to me, "Oh, I think you could make a good journalist." And that was an idea which formed in my head. But the fact that I saw an avenue to try and get into animation, which is something I've never done before, but I was like, well, that seems like a pathway into games. So when I did that animation course, and while doing the course, it's sort of like, oh well, this is definitely a pathway to get into games or film. I didn't really have an interest in film. Like I love like watching films, and special effects and stuff always kind of fascinated me, but I was like, I really wanted to get into games. So I almost just fell into it just by chance of spotting this course. Like had I not seen that, I don't know where I would have gone. And thankfully now there are much more opportunities for kids who want to go down that path, but at that stage it just seemed like almost by chance, but happy that happened.
You both mentioned education and quite high, and Danny, I noticed that you dropped in that you did really well in your GCSEs. Thanks. So did I, kinda, not really. But you both, university degrees and masters. Obviously there are some people from whatever background don't get to go on that journey. So is there a route in without having all these educational accolades?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like I said, back when I was doing it, I didn't see another way in. Like I didn't know how to get in. But now, for example, my lead at work, he did a degree in, I can't remember what it was, but not animation. And he taught himself animation after he finished uni, and then has got a job in the industry. So now it's a lot easier to learn certain aspects without having to go down that academic route in terms of certain skill sets. But it's like I was saying before, like you don't necessarily have to be a developer to work in the games industry. You can, like I said, be a streamer, create content. You can get into it via publishing, marketing and stuff. So the academic route, thankfully, is not the only way to be part of games.
That's fair. Corey, are you going to counter what he says by saying, because you've got masters. I also heard that mic drop as well. That was phenomenal. But yeah, because it's writing, you said you did history, all that stuff. Can you get in if you don't know how to write? I mean, obviously you need to write, but yeah.
Yeah, it's I chose the path that I did because I wanted to make myself as employable as possible, because I knew there was hundreds of other writers out there that could do what I do. And as because there wasn't a clear path into to become a games journalist as well, because whenever I said to people outside of my family circle, like I want to be a games journalist, they go, so what does that mean? And I say, I want to be a journalist. And they go, oh, like Trevor McDonald, or, like Myra Stewart, something. I'd be like, yeah, okay. So, so it allowed me to have a focus. But I agree 100% with Danny. You don't need to have a formal education. It helps in some respects, in some disciplines, definitely, especially where there's a lot of competition. I am super aware that there are, like I say, hundreds of writers out there. there are less narrative designers out there that are kind of like aware of the video game, what it takes to be a video game writer by comparison to, say, like a screenwriter or what have you, because they flex very different muscles at times. And video game writing for me, I mean, I've co-written screenplays, I write comic books, I've written prose. Video game writing is probably the hardest writing that I've ever experienced. It's extremely intricate and complicated. And if you have the ability to understand what it means to be able to write a video game, then that will help you substantially more than if you don't. But you don't need to go to university or college to do that. You can, in theory, pick up, there are lots of books out there that weren't available to me when I was growing up. I mean, the internet was barely available to me when I was growing up. So that's the reason why I took the route that I did. You know, there was no way to kind of know any better. But these days, it's like you have tools that you can use at home. There's a game maker and there's something called Ink. And these are all tools that allow you to create games at home if you want to do them. And, you know, the barriers to entry to those are relatively low. They're either free or they, you know, maybe about 20 quid or something like that. And then you can make your own games. Naturally, you need to have an ability to understand each part of what it is to make a game. So, you know, that's where, you know, books and what have you can come into it. But I think there are enough avenues out there these days to allow you to understand and teach yourself what it is to be able to make aspects of a game in itself. Yes, sometimes it's easier to have a formal route in that respect, but if it's not something that's available to you, there are plenty of ways to go through there. And like Danny said, it's not just about games development either. The streaming community has grown ridiculously large in the last kind of like 5-6 years in particular. And I know some people may look down and go like, oh, you know, it's only streaming or anything like that. But I tell you, trying to talk about a game live while playing the game and being interesting is so hard. It is ridiculously hard. I cannot do it myself. You know, I've been playing games for like what, nearly 40 years. I still can't do that. It is a very specific skill, and there are lots of skills out there across the entire industry that, you know, don't necessarily require a formal education or anything like that. But I think for me, the key is like, you're only going to know if you try. It's very easy to kind of say, oh, I'm not 100% sure about how to get in this, or if I'm not going to be able to be competent in doing this. Try it. If you try it and it feels comfortable and it seems like you're good with it, you know, test out on a few people, get some feedback. And if it works, then just keep developing it. There's plenty of material out there with the internet alone that can help you develop those skills and really allow you to push yourself out there a lot more. So don't feel discouraged is what I would say to anybody. Don't feel discouraged if you can't get into, you know, do a university course or a college course. There are so many different ways to get into the industry and make it work for you, depending on your skill set as well.
Thank you. So I've phrased this question. I'm going to ask the big black question, but it's just obviously representation in this industry for women and people of color is, I'm assuming, well, not assuming, from what I've read, kind of dire, but there's been more focus on diversifying film, TV, theatre and book publishing than there has been, I think, from outside looking in for the gaming industry. So, you know, obviously pretty much every guy I know, black guy I know, has an Xbox. Definitely every black person I know plays some sort of game. So what's your experience being black in the industry, to be blunt? I'll start with you, Corey.
It's been a journey. It's definitely been a journey. I personally have had a relatively easy ride, to be entirely honest with you. Yeah, I've experienced definitely experienced institutionalized and kind of like, you know, more kind of hidden forms of racism in my years of being in the games industry. Thankfully, not as much as some of my peers and some of my friends. That's for sure. But it has been there and it has been felt. That is also part of the reason why at the time when I was kind of aiming to become a games journalist, I was equipping myself to have a like college A levels and degrees and everything like that, because I didn't see a single black games writer in the magazines that I was reading. There was in fact one black person, which was a guy called Oz Brown, who was actually an artist designer who used to kind of like do the illustrations and designs for these magazines called Mean Machines and Computer and Video Games. And he was literally, yeah, see, Danny recognizes. Yeah, Danny definitely recognizes. It's he was literally the only black person I knew in the entire industry at the time when I was like, growing up as a teenager. And I thought, that's weird. So so let me reinforce my credentials as much as possible to allow myself to be, like I say, as employable as possible when becoming a writer in this industry. And even when I joined the industry, I was aware I was like one of the very few Black British writers in the video game industry at the time. I wasn't the first, that's for sure. I'm 100% guaranteed I wasn't the first, but I was certainly among the first of people there, because I didn't come across a single other person for several years. There were lots of American Black writers there, but there wasn't any Black British writers that I was aware of at that particular time, which made me feel a little bit kind of, it makes you feel stand out. You're in these press events and you realize that you're like, you're the only Black person there. Thankfully, that wasn't causing too much in the way of issues or any sense of hostility or problems when I was out and about. But I mean, I take an example here. When you do press trips, when you're a games journalist, you have to fly all over the world, and it's amazing. It's brilliant. I love it. But I went to a trip one time and I was in Spain. I was in one part of Spain, and I do what I usually do. I just basically, when there's a bit of downtime, I just go out the hotel and I just go for a walk. And I was walking down this road away from the hotel, and I suddenly had this awareness that like people were watching me from across the street, and like people were driving by and honking their horns and stuff. And I was just like, okay, this is interesting. So I'm gonna start walking back to my hotel now because I don't feel safe here. And this is one of these things where, this is ubiquitous to our experience, generally speaking, anyway. Wherever we go, we've always got that in the back of our minds. But as a games journalist at the time, having to travel the world, you suddenly become very aware that when you're traveling the world, you may experience people that may not exactly be comfortable with you being there, and that's their problem. But you've got to have it still in the forefront of your mind when you're doing the work and everything like that. I'm very grateful for the experiences that I've had, and I'm super grateful as well for the teams that I've worked in, especially at Silver Rain, where we've got a very diverse team anyway. And Windrush Tales is exceptionally diverse as well in terms of like the team. I'm literally the only guy that's working on that game, and like we've got 3 Black people in a team of 4, which is incredible in itself. And Silver Rain has a very kind of like similar dynamic and makeup of people, where we've got lots of women and lots of people of color, which is incredible. But I'm very aware that this is a relatively small we're amongst a minority in the wider sense of the games industry in itself. And that does need to change, but it will hopefully change a bit more as we go along.
And Danny, I'll come to you. What's your experience being Black in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Corey's, I've had a fairly kind of straightforward time. I haven't really had many issues, thankfully. I mean, when I started in my university course, there was myself and one other Black guy on the course. So I was aware that I was going into an industry that didn't really have a lot of people which looked like me. But then at the same time, I was like, well, I don't care. This is what I want to do. I mean, as Black people, we've all had that talk from your parents. You have to be twice as good as everybody else. I mean, my mum and dad never explicitly said why, but me and my brothers, we kind of figured it out. So I applied that to every aspect of my life. It's like, right, well, I'm going to be good at this. So if I want to do something, then I've done it on my own merits. So when I first got into the industry, the first job I had, I was the only Black person at the company, and then 2 weeks later, another guy joined, which was great. It was like, oh, right, me and him, we vibed on straight away. But I remember there was a journalist came to the studio one day to do a story on the studio. He said, oh, we just need like a photo of some guys. So then me, the other Black guy, Chris, and this Asian guy, we were selected for the photo with somebody else. We knew who it was straight away. It was like, all right. It's like, on one hand, I was like, you know what? I respect the fact that you want to promote the fact that, look, it's not a studio of like white men. We do have some color here, but interesting kind of being used as a prop, so to speak, in that respect. But I mean, I had no issues there. The only issue I had at that company, and it wasn't anything, it was kind of hampered my career. I had an incident where there was this old cleaning lady. She was a lovely lady. We got on well. And one day she made a comment was me and two other guys were sat around talking. She made a comment. I can't remember what it was. It's a racist comment. I can't remember. And they just got up and walked off. And I was just like, whoa, like, so now one of the guys, he was actually my lead. So I'm like, well, you've just witnessed this and you've just like, because he felt uncomfortable dealing with that situation. So I was like, all right. So I just went and pulled her aside, spoke to her. I was like, listen, that wasn't on, blah, blah, blah. She apologized or whatever. But I had more of an issue with them for like not having my back in a situation where this woman's clearly said something that you had a problem with because you walked off, but you just thought, I kind of don't want to deal with it. So that's the only really overt incident that happened to me personally. I remember the next company I worked at, there was a black art director. He actually interviewed me. I remember going in, this guy came in, I'm like, oh my gosh, another black guy. Like, as with any walk of life, you see another black face, somebody like, oh my gosh. And he was art director. He'd been there for like a good while. So instantly I saw somebody like in a leadership role. I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's good that this company's got like some diversity. But again, at the same time, it didn't bother me that I was going to be one of two or three kind of black people there. Remember working at Sony, which was a much more diverse, because it's obviously a bigger company. And they're currently now Rocksteady, which is probably the biggest collection of black people that I've worked with. But like, obviously, like representation is important to me. And I mean, I'm a black man. I wear that with pride. But when I'm at work, I'm Danny, the animator. I'm not a black man who happens to kind of work here. So I just kind of not ignore, but it's just like, right, can I do my job? Is there anything which is hampering me from doing my job? If it's something which is race related, then I'll obviously address that. But I've never really had that issue. I just try and do the best job that I can do. And the fact that I happen to be black is like, well, it's all good. I hope that people will see that and can be inspired by that. I mean, the industry is trying to get better in terms of addressing diversity, because obviously it is a major problem, and especially like black women in particular. Like in my career, I think I've worked with 4 black women in total, which is just like ridiculous. But it's, as with everything, it kind of takes time. But it seems that now there is a more of a willingness to try and address that issue and improve representation, because I mean, it is important. It matters in terms of the product that you're making. You can make a better product if you've got a more diverse workforce. People working there feel more comfortable. It is a very kind of tricky subject, but like I say, I just try and do the best job that I can do. If people have a problem with me because of the color of my skin, that's their issue. I'm just going and doing my job. If they have an issue with my work, that's one thing. Like, we can address that, but anything else, they need to fix that themselves.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's that balance between, being the right man for the job or the white woman for the job, and just leaving and getting on with it, and not feeling pressure to carry the burden. Like, I'm black and I've got to represent, but also the industry has to open up its doors and not be so reluctant to change the narrative, as it were. And you know, if you put some people of color on the front of your brochure, and make sure it trickles down into the rest of the company and higher up the chain as well. We are running out of time, which is great, because that means we've had a good chat. I do want to get to ask some questions, but Corey, I just wanted to quickly, and Danny actually, because I think I made Corey talk for really long. So Danny, Corey's been the co-writer of Windrush Games. However, Danny, have you created your own page? You do stuff on the side, and in this industry, is there a need now to be an owner of a game, like there is to be your own filmmaker, like create your film or write your book? Is there a similar mindset to this type of in this industry? Like, you've got to be the own. Do you know what I mean? Like a drive to be like Danny Murdock Games and stuff like that. I don't know.
In terms of doing my own stuff, no. I've got 3 kids. I haven't got time for anything other than dealing with that. To be honest, I think it depends on the individual. Certain people, if they feel they want to take ownership of something, then more power to them. I mean, for me, I love the job that I have. I love the stuff that I'm working on, and I'm happy to contribute that way. And just when something comes out, be like, yeah, like I did that. So I think if somebody wants to do it, it's fine. And it's like Corey's saying, like people can like make their own games now. So the avenue is there for them to create their own stuff and and own that. But yeah, I'm happy just working where I am and just getting to contribute in that way.
Danny, so please tell us about Windrush Games. And it's like you're the co-writer, giving you the proper intro. You're the co-writer of the world's first Windrush video game, Windrush Tales, and it's an in development, branching narrative. Please, if you could break that down in 2 minutes, it'd be great.
Yeah, so basically I co-write it along with a team, Shella Ramanan, Claire Morwood, who make Freefall games. They were BAFTA nominated for their most recent game, before I forget, and Naima Ramanan as well. And the idea was just basically at the time to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Windrush, which was a few years back. We never got around to releasing the game, and then the Windrush scandal happened, and we were just like, we're too vexed about it. So we just kind of like, let's just keep moving and keep developing. So we keep on kind of like putting it together. We're still pushing it. We hopefully have some news to be able to talk about it a bit more, but we want to put people in the experience of what it's like to be in the 1950s and 1960s, coming to this country, having been invited by like, you know, the royal family and the government to help repair the country after the World War II, and then be pushed away by so many people and be discriminated against. And we don't want to make it, you know, struggle the game. We want to celebrate as well, you know, celebrate our culture, celebrate the differences that we have, and celebrate what it was like to be part of a cultural shift into Britain and become a founding kind of part of the dynamic of what we see today in this country. So hopefully we'll be able to convey that experience through the game itself.
Oh, I have so many more questions for you guys, but I'm going to share my platform. Monica had a question. Monica, your question's long, so please try and consolidate it. If you can unmute and ask your question, go.
Sure, thank you. So when you guys started, no job counselor could tell you what route to take to do what you do today. And the jobs in industry pop up all the time. They're varied and new. And it feels like education lags behind. If you could re-envision how to take the path to what you do, what would you do? Do you think that education is the route? Do you think that industry should do a bit more, you know, with apprenticeship program, with maybe mentoring, with online courses? What could you imagine today if you could design that? What would that be for your particular path? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take that?
I can quickly just sorry, Danny.
No, you can both answer it shortly.
Yeah, I think you hit upon it, Monica, in terms of like apprenticeships, internships, stuff like that. That's stuff that really, I mean, I had a placement when I was doing my games journalism, but that was quite rare. I got rejected across several magazines before one internet site accepted me as a placement kind of possibility. So I think these days, having that ability to kind of go in and get your hands dirty with actual teams themselves and work towards what it's like to be in an environment to work in games. There's also BAFTA runs a young game designer kind of program every year. I was a juror for one of the categories this year as well, and that's a really great way for young people to be able to pitch their ideas, put some stuff down on paper, and get it kind of like what it's actually like to design and create a game from that perspective. And there are lots of little different initiatives like that around these days that allow you to kind of get in without having to go through formal education, because I think experience is super important to understand what it's like to kind of be able to make each part of a game. So I think that's probably vital, and being able to use those avenues are a way to kind of really enhance your possibilities and prospects.
Danny.
Internships, apprenticeships, anything like that. I think game studios they seem like almost these far off distant places, and I think that in some ways they need to be more relatable, and people feel that it's something that they can achieve and they can attain. So recently, like, we've done a scheme of work with a university where I was actually mentoring like a couple of students. Now, obviously, like, they're still kind of down the educational route, but the fact that they've got some hands-on contact with somebody working in industry who can give them advice and like tell them the journey that I've been on, I think that's quite interesting. But just expanding that, because like as we said before, like the education route doesn't have to be the only way. People can teach themselves like animation, specifically to what I do, But then if a studio is like, all right, well, we'll give you an opportunity to like showcase what you can do, I think that would be quite interesting. It just, when I started out, it just seemed like a very exclusive like club that you had to like almost peek behind the curtain to get into. Now there are more games courses, which is good, like educationally, but I think it just needs to be expanded because it is a great industry to get into. And like you say, everybody plays games. If you've got a phone, you can play a game. People with consoles, it is a really viable industry, especially for to be frank, for like young black people, like, all right, I might not want to go down the traditional like route in terms of work, but I love playing games. How do I get into that? I can't get into university, but if I've got an easy avenue to get into that way, then yeah, I think games need to make it easier to entice people.
Thank you. Robin has a question.
Yes, I did. I wanted to know how I could get into the gaming industry as a narrative writer. Yeah, I do have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in film and television production, and with a minor in oceanography.
I think Corey.
Yeah, so basically there are one of the things that I say is networking is really important. If you like, I know social media can have its problems, many problems, but if you can get on social media, like with Twitter, stuff like that, start talking to people who are in the various avenues there. If you want to be a narrative designer, then there are lots of narrative designers on Twitter, myself included. And we're accessible to kind of answer questions and everything like that. But we're also, what we tend to do, a lot of us tend to do, is we signal boost opportunities like openings across all different kind of types of experience, from junior to lead and kind of director level. And that will allow you to kind of like get a peek into maybe getting a toe in the door. I think given your background and the fact that you have a background in education, that's always a great start to have. If you haven't written a game before, then maybe potentially look at starting small with and actually writing your own game. I mentioned earlier on things like Game Maker and Ink. They are tools available that are either free or that you can pay for, that you can use to start kind of developing your own game. Windrush Tales is actually being using Ink as a development tool to kind of create it there. And that gives you the experience of what it's like to actually have to create player choices, make decisions. Like I said, plenty of books out there as well that can also help to supplement your experience and your education. But I think being able to look out there for jobs and at junior level or kind of like intermediate level and kind of start applying for those while making your own game, I think that is actually like really, really important, because I think you'll tend to find a lot of job descriptions will say, we love experience that have like screenwriters or comic books or TV or what have you. But if you've got that games writing experience, even if you're doing it yourself, that will always put you above people that only have the experience of not writing the games. So being able to focus on that and developing that will massively boost your chances in kind of getting in. But do feel free to seek me out on social media. You know, I can put you in like the direction of people that kind of have those opportunities open for you, and we can kind of develop from there onwards.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you,
You're
guys. We've got 5 minutes, and I want to get a question in. Are there any more questions? Okay, quickly, I'm going to jump in. I want to know, because you're doing Windrush Tales, that's what I wanted to respond to and just ask you and Danny, can you turn any narrative or any idea into a game? Is there anything that won't work? Because I suppose I would, yes, can I see representation we've discussed, an all-black street fighter or something that speaks to a culture or a community directly? But does it become laborious? Does it become a bit tedious, like have to do like a kind of black version of this or an all-women version of that? Does that apply to the gaming industry the way it does to film and TV? Danny, I'll go to you first.
I mean, nothing is out of bounds, really. I mean, I think that if somebody wants to create an all-black game, then that's great. I mean, the sad fact is that it's probably economic decisions that would define whether, like, an all-black game, some marketing team might be like, we can't sell that, or we can only sell that to a niche audience. At the end of the day, games is a business, and like publishers want to get as much return as possible. So it's just like, right, what's going to sell the most? I mean, that's a kind of cynical way of looking at it. But in terms of like creativity, I mean, like Windrush Tales sounds like a phenomenal thing. And the fact that somebody's doing that is great, because there will be an audience for that. It might not be as big an audience as, I don't know, say GTA, but there's still an audience of people who are going to play that, and they're going to like love that experience. So yeah, I mean, nothing is out of bounds. You can make a game out of anything. I mean, the challenge is that games are harder to do than others, but then that's a challenge for the team that's creating that. But yeah, there's no limits really to what you want to create.
Just quickly, and by the way, GTA, for those who don't know, because I know everything, Grand Theft Auto. I feel so clever. What are your favorite games to play outside of the work that you work on? And if you're not allowed to mention anything, I respect that. I don't know, competition and all that type of stuff. But what are your favorite games to play, Corey?
I used to love RPGs, role-playing games, but I'm very time poor these days. It's crazy. I barely get time. So I tend to push myself more towards there's a genre called roguelike and roguelite. And basically what it is, it's like that can span any other kind of subgenre itself. But what it is that the idea is that you play the game, every time you play it, every time you die, the levels change or the environment changes or something changes about the game. So you're never having to play the same thing over and over again. And I do tend to play a lot of roguelikes and a lot of roguelites as well. So things like Spelunky 2, FTL, which is called Faster Than Light, Don't Starve. These are all games which I absolutely love. They're ridiculously hard, but I love playing them. I love the constant adaptation of what you need to do to keep going. So those are the games that I tend to pretty much go towards these days.
I know those games too. Danny.
Yeah, well, like Corey, I'm time like I said, I've got 3 kids, so I don't get time to play games anymore. But when I do, I love like single player action adventure games with a story. God of War, Uncharted. I just finished yesterday Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is a fantastic game. From an animation point of view, it's a joy to play. But in terms of representation, like the way that they've captured Harlem, the essence of Harlem, the people, like the culture is exceptional. But yeah, that kind of stuff. Football games every now and then, but yeah, like I don't have the time that I had in my youth, I'm afraid.
I proudly play Candy Crush and Woodoku. That's all I'm saying, guys. I mean, there's so much more to unpack and get into. RPG, role-playing games. I'm learning things and phrases and stuff like that. But we're time poor, and just really want to thank you for joining us and giving us some insight into the world of gaming from a creator's perspective. And I hope you guys watching got something out of it and learned something. I definitely did. I'm going to pretend I know all these things and share them with my friends. But yeah, thank you so much. Please check out the rest of the S.O.U.L Film Festival schedule. We go to soulfilm.co.uk, and we have lots of events running until Sunday. And again, I just want to thank you guys for your time. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Corey. It's been amazing. And